Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm very honored and excited to be interviewing a very special space champion, Miss Phnam Bagley. Phnam designs the future of everything on and off planet Earth. She is a French industrial designer, futurist, and aerospace architect, creating cutting-edge hardware and experiences. Her work is exclusively focused on projects that support the United Nations 17 SDG goals, or SDGs, and creates a positive impact on humanity, the environment, and innovation. Phnam works with a variety of companies, from startups to Fortune 500 and government agencies, covering 4 continents. She speaks internationally on the subject of designing the future of everything, covering stories of sustainability, design, space exploration, education, and human flourishing. She even co-hosts an educational video series called Future, sharing tools and insights about design and the future of everything. As you can see, Phnam has a very interdisciplinary background and intertwined her love for space with all the work that she does. And so I'm very excited to learn more about her journey into the aerospace industry and more specifically about her niche entering space architecture. So welcome, Phnam. Thank you so much for taking your time to inspire the next generation of diverse aerospace leaders.
Thank you, Gitika, for having me. And I love this subject, so I'm ready to dig in.
Yeah, just to kick it off, I remember when I first came across your work, I was just mind blown with the amount of work that's currently happening in the field of space architecture, which is one that's booming, but many people don't know about. So, to kind of start this conversation off, could you share a little bit more about your current projects and some of the work that you're currently spending most of your time on?
Yeah, I mean, in the space-related projects, we are developing a space station module. Working with Sierra Space, they're developing an inflatable model of space module, which has a hard core and an inflatable volume around. The advantage of that is you can actually ship in a smaller rocket and then expand the volume and welcome more astronauts or more equipment on board. So it's pretty interesting to be working on something like so cutting edge and really thinking about how design and human-centered design in particular is going to be included in all of that. And as designers and architects, we have to think not only about the function of things, which of course you need to make sure the astronauts are alive, stay alive, and don't kill each other. But we also have to think about how they can thrive, how they can stay healthy, how they can be effective at work, how they can learn new things, new ways of moving around, new ways of using tools in order to make their stay in space as effective and productive as possible. So we really cover all of that. Other types of projects I'm involved with. This summer, I'm actually going on my very first analog astronaut mission. I'm going to be on Devon Island, which is I believe, the world's largest uninhabited island. And the reason why, so Devon Island is actually in North Canada, like in the Arctic. And the reason why it's a very interesting place on Earth is because the geology seems to be very similar to that of Mars. And so doing a lot of simulation is going to be interesting. So we are going to be probably a couple days away from the closest medical help. So the simulation can be quite dangerous, and the weather is quite unpredictable. So yeah, I've been brought in to see how I can make the simulation module a lot more comfortable for the people staying there for 10 to 12 days at a time. So that's kind of related to space architecture. We're also involved in a couple other projects designing scientific equipment or medical devices that can be applied in space. So we have to think about, how do you launch such products, right? The way we design on Earth is very different from the way we design in space, and they're actually economical and technological and engineering. Um, considerations that are quite different. And I, because my career has been both on Earth and in space, it's a pretty fun gymnastics exercise to go from one to the other and understand how we make decisions from a design and engineering perspective, and how we ensure that the company that we're working for gets what they need, and also ends up in a financially advantageous place after the project launches.
Wow. As you were talking, there were just so many questions that came about because you touched on a lot of different points. And one of the things that kept coming was how interdisciplinary really your job is as a space architect, because it's not like you're focusing on, oh, I'm just designing this one particular type of thing. It's like different settings, different tools you're working with, different environments, different considerations, as you were mentioning. What skills? I mean, I feel like you need like every skill. So how do you do your job as a space architecture when every project is so new? Do you work in a more collaborative team with people with different skills? Do you do a lot more reading on like those specific topics? Do you have a medical device background? I'm very interested in aerospace medicine. So what you said about devices was quite intriguing. So I'm just curious about how, as a space architecture, you're able to find that balance of working on different projects while also maintaining those skill sets.
I think it's going to be all of the above that you just mentioned. And also, yeah, the way I practice space architecture and design has a lot to do with how my career went. So I actually went to grad school, to undergrad school in France to study space design, and graduate school in the US at the University of Houston to study space architecture. And at the end of my studies, I could have gone down the path of, getting hired at NASA or whatever company or ESA or whatever group was available at the time who understood and needed the skills of a space architect. However, because the community was so small at the time, by the way, that was 20 years ago. That was before, SpaceX and Blue Origin and all these companies were doing anything of note yet. Um, I realized that I could never become a great designer or a great space architect if I stayed in that very small niche group of people, right? I needed to have a lot more experience designing and building products, manufacturing them, learning about engineering, learning about human factors, and all those things. So, what I did is that I actually quit the space industry for 12 years of my career and then did everything I could. To learn about everything on this planet. So I learned about I had a career in luxury goods design, so designing like watches and bags. And then I went into audio devices. I designed like more speakers and headphones than anybody you've probably ever met. And then I went into sports equipment, like basically mass manufactured equipment that has kind of like strength and tension requirements that are quite specific. And then I went into medical devices, so everything from brain implants to wearables to equipments in the surgeon's operating room, all of that. I designed all of that. And then went to robotics, right? Like I expanded my knowledge of how to design and manufacture things that were quite complex. Some of them were just mechanical devices, and some of them had electronics and like machine learning and AI in them. And so I became very familiar with all of these skills, and I also placed myself geographically in areas that were very prominent with that. So I was in San Francisco, right next to Silicon Valley, for 13 years, exposed to the latest and greatest in technology, coming from not only the entrepreneurial side of things, but also the universities. A lot of the work that we do today actually comes from university research labs that are working on cutting edge things, and they are fantastic at the science. They're fantastic at like the technology development, going from 0 to 1. But we help them go from 1 to 100, right? With developing products that people love, and creating economic success for the companies we work with. So all of this to say that the path to a career in space is not necessarily straightforward. I thought it was going to be straightforward because I went to school for that. But you also have to understand how you're going to align that career with the skills that you have. What are the skills that you actually have to learn? And where do you need to place yourself geographically and in terms of career to become good at it? And I would say staying in the same job for 20 years is probably not going to get you there because you're just going to climb the hierarchical ladder and become a manager who doesn't really get their hands dirty. I like to get my hands dirty. I like to CAD, I like to build, I like to collaborate with engineers, I like to like get things wrong. You know, that's really how I learn. And so I've designed my entire career to do that. And I'm not done, right? Like I'm in my mid 40s now. And I'm still really looking forward to the next 20 or so years, continuing to learn, continuing to figure out what are the cutting edge assumptions that we've made so far in the space industry that actually need to be tweaked with a design eye to actually serve the people we're designing for.
I love that new perspective on looking at, different things. And before we get into what made you come back into space or specifically put a lot more time into this, specifically the aerospace sector, I do have a question about your process of this design, because as someone who is not the most artistic person, but I think every person has an artistic side to them. I'm just curious how the process is. Like, for example, you're going on your first analog mission to Devon Island, where you'll be trying to observe what are some improvements you can make. Do you ever visualize certain things that you realize later on that might not be feasible? How does the whole like artistic process and like the vision go about for you? Is it what are your questions that you're asking yourself when you observe these different rooms and these different environments, different technology? Are there certain key points that you have for yourself, or is this more of like an artistic eye? Or I'm just curious of what that process is before we get a little bit more into your journey.
Yeah, there are many different methodologies that we can use. In that particular scenario, I will probably start with two things. One is sensory experiences, and the other one is culture. So every time we design a space or even a thing, or we design anything really, you really have to understand how anybody, an architect, a non-architect, a child, someone passing by is going to experience it. We are in this era of humanity, we are very visual, very visual beings. So making sure that people understand, what's going on. What is the hierarchy of information? What is the icon that is standing in front of you? What is the first impression visually that you have to put out there? And that can be done with silhouette, that can be done with colors, that can be done with textures or anything like that. So starting with the visual, and then after that, we have to go into the auditory, right? Like, is the place hollow and full of hard surfaces? Is it hard to hear each other? Or does one corner of the space feel a little bit more like a cocoon where all the sounds are absorbed? Or the median sound is pretty low and you can play music, and what kind of music do you play and throughout the day, and what kind of impression does it have? But auditory is not only music or noise, it's also those little impressions that help you kind of like situate yourself in a space. Like, for example, on this earth, you're sitting, at your desk right now. You're not aware of the birds chirping in the background, of the dog barking four doors down the street. But these things are actually captured by your brain and give you a sense of knowing where you are. So you are, less confused. And so when you are in space, for example, you don't have these things because, who's designing those things? Um, and so it's actually very easy to feel lost on top of the fact that you're floating around and there's no up, there's no down, there's no ground. So it's very, very difficult. And the colors are very different, right? So we have to think about the auditory, and then you have to think about the touch, right? Like it's very cold up there. So the way you touch things, you probably have like layers through which you have to touch things. So how do you really feel that connection of touching things or smelling things or tasting things? So really going through the whole set of physical experiences through the senses. And when I say senses, is beyond the five senses, the five physical senses that we're taught, right? We have the sense of proprioception, which tells us where we are in the space. We have the sense of temperature. We have the sense of, a lot of things. So really going through that whole list is very important. The second point that I brought up earlier was culture. So we are still on Earth, and we're still integrating, the local culture. And I'm actually still in the process of learning who they are, how they live, what's important to them, what they eat, and things like that. So in this particular mission, which will have that element which is different from Mars. Mars doesn't have any human culture, but it has a certain type of landscape and temperature and things like that. So how do we integrate it? How do we make sure that we do not harm whatever is there? Right. Yesterday I was in training with that group and figuring out what to do when a polar bear shows up. Right. These are the types of um, things that you have to train yourself, otherwise you put yourself in a very dangerous situation, right? So being very aware of where you're setting foot, whose land you're, basically taking over for the next 10 or 12 days, and how you're going to respect it is so incredibly important. When we think of Mars, for example, how do we respect a land that's never been explored before? How do we make sure that we don't leave a bunch of trash behind ourselves, just because that's the habit that we've formed on this planet, right? Like, so these are the types of questions we have to ask ourselves. So yeah, from a design perspective, that's how I would um, kind of tackle it: the senses and culture first.
That's really great to understand that whole view perspective. I never realized how much thought really goes in behind some of these products that we see every day that we find so much comfort and joy in. But there's a lot of thought to user experience. And I think that's just such a great perspective to have. And so pivoting a little bit to your journey, what made you come back? As you mentioned, for 12 years, you were outside the aerospace sector. What made you want to come back and transfer some of your skills specifically to aerospace, because I see you attending all these incredible conferences, sharing about your work. And so I'm curious, what brought you back in into aerospace?
Well, one, because it's always been a passion of mine, right? Since I was a little girl. It's funny, I never wanted to be an astronaut. I always wanted to fix where astronauts live. That's always been like a very,
Oh.
very clear path for me. And before I was even involved with like astronauts, I wanted to be an astrophysicist because I really like the idea of being able to answer the big questions that are much bigger than humanity itself. Um, so yeah, so coming back to space was very natural, and also, was educated in it. So there was that a lot of knowledge that I had accumulated over time. And I kept an eye, even though I was away and didn't work in it, I kept an eye on what was going on. And of course, during that time, all the private commercial companies started blooming and doing all of these incredible things. And slowly I started seeing people get an interest in space architecture and the all the implications of human space flights, whether it has to do with health or whether it has to do with comfort, or even like the idea of selling space to humans, right? That's very much of a design exercise. And so once I felt like, okay, I see all of this happening, which means that there are jobs out there, right? Like pretty important when you're running a consulting firm. And so that's when I started slowly getting back into it. I got back into it by spending a couple years essentially listening to people. I would go to all these conferences and meet all these people who have been in the space industry for a while, or new ones, or people like you who have the curiosity wanting to integrate it later in their career, and really understand where people's heads were. And it became very clear that the human element of space flight, it was growing in interest. Because before that, the human element was more on the heroic side, right? Like these people are highly trained, ex-military pilots, like PhD medical doctor, whatever, and they were pre-selected to the max to make sure that they don't die before they come back, right? Which was necessary for the early periods of space exploration. I don't deny that. But we've come to an era of human spaceflight where people want to go to explore, people want to go to do experiments, people want to go because they want to go. And we need to design a space environment to support all of that. None of these people are going to have the time or the energy or even the skills to be like superhuman, right? Including you and me, right? Like I have no interest in spending the next 10 years of my life doing that. However, we have the interest to go and to explore and to see how, as designers and architects, we can make it better. So, so I've been asked recently during an interview, like, what would you do if you went up there? And my first response was, I would fix everything, right? Like, give me the drill and give me the tools and give me, like a bunch of equipment to change the light and to change the surfaces and to make the whole thing a lot more comfortable. And I will make it with my own hands, right? And that's exhilarating to me. It's like inviting people over for a meal. You invite your friends over. You want to make sure that they're comfortable and they're enjoying the food and they have great conversation. That's exactly the same role I want to have in a space station or space habitat. I want to be the person who just transforms the entire place and make it feel like home, make it feel like a place that is welcoming, so you don't have to like worry about dying every day.
And so, I mean, it was great that you still stayed in touch with space. And as you mentioned, I can clearly see the trends as well with private space, how much space tourism is starting to become more of a reality, and how a lot of private companies want to make space more of an accessible place for individuals to travel to in the long-term future. And so, architecture will be at the forefront of that with human comfort, that experiencing. And I love what you said about trying to make it like home, and I think we always desire comfort, especially on dangerous, experiences like going to space. There's still a level of risk involved, and so having that
Mhm.
comfort, having that full experience, is something that's magical, and so that's wonderful. And I have to go back to when you were younger because you were mentioning you always knew you wanted to, go to space, build things, or become an astrophysicist. So, did you have an aha moment that inspired you to enter the aerospace sector? Maybe it was like a teacher, a class, a movie, a book. Was there ever like that aha moment you experienced? And what specifically led you into space architecture? Because I feel like even today, a lot of students don't realize they can pursue space architecture as a college degree. So, how did you discover those opportunities and kind of have the courage to seek out opportunities in that space as a young professional? Because I think even today, many students are nervous about entering a career that's so novel like space architecture, even though it's been around for a while. So, what are your thoughts about? So, what was your aha moment? And then, what's your thought about pursuing space architecture now as a college student?
I had a few aha moments. I guess the classic one is looking up at the stars and understanding how little insignificant we are. That happened pretty early in life. I was probably 6 or 7. And I did a lot of these things alone. I didn't really have like mentors, adults around me who were particularly interested in those things. So a lot of introspection there. The second aha moment that kind of like changed my life a little bit in more ways than just space was so I grew up in France, right outside of Paris, and I had an American cousin. We just exchanged letters because I didn't speak English. I would write to him in like very broken English, and he would write back to me. And in one year, he sent me 2 books. One of them was Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, and the other one was Calvin and Hobbes. One of those like very fun comics. Um, and these 2 books really like shifted something in me. One was about figuring out why the universe is the way it is, and the other one is about the poetry of why the universe is the way it is, right? I thought it was like an incredible dichotomy, and I was just 12, so probably didn't really fully understand what that meant quite yet. But to this day, I can trace back a lot of the way I make decisions in design or in my life or even design medical devices where I really think about why we're doing things, where is it going, and what is the poetic meaning behind all of that, and how does it change people's perspective and relationship to beauty in this world. So that has done it. The reason why I got into space architecture was very interesting. So I went to school first for a field called industrial design, which is the design of physical products for mass manufacturing, right? So I went to this school that was well known for car design and, for other types of like physical products. And but by the way, I got into that school not because I had any particular love for design. I was very separated from the world at that point, at the end of high school. And so I just happened to show up at a job fair in which that particular school had a booth. And I saw these drawings of cars, of, physical products. I'm like, oh, that sounds fun. I didn't realize that a specific career designed all those things. Like most people, I thought it was like very smart engineers or whoever designing those, maybe artists, but like I didn't know that design was a thing, right? And so I signed up and I got accepted, and and it was a 5-year program. It was very, very great education. And in the third year of that program, that school just opened their space department. And of course, I was the first person to sign up. I'm like, this is serendipitous. Like, this is what I've wanted to do my whole life, and here we are. And so I sign up, of course, and I have a blast. I come up with all of these crazy ideas. And I remember I had two professors in space design, and one of them thought I was insane. Actually, I reconnected with him recently. He thought I was completely insane, 20 some years ago. But he made he had like two direction he could go with me. He could either stop me in my tracks and just like bring me back to reality, or let me go explore down the path that I was interested in, which was very, like talking about the emotions and, like all of these soft aspects of human space flights. And so he chose the second path. He let me do whatever I wanted. And I have spent the last 20 years of my life making every idea that I came up with in my early 20s real. Um, and so it's thanks to people like this that really let you be and let you explore those insane ideas and figure out, through the experience of life, what it will take to make them real. Because of course, if I have an idea that is not going to be possible for the next 40 years, is going to sound completely impossible today, very much like moonshots, right? And moonshot is always something that sounds insane to the average person, but with the right rigor and the right, being at the right place at the right time and having an immense sense of curiosity, which I've always carried with me, I was able to one by one figure out what are the engineering, and the physical and the design and the human factor, kind of like consideration I have to put in place to push these ideas into reality. And so it's quite a privilege to be able to do that and to trace it back to such a long time in my life.
Wow, I'm just that like makes my heart so happy. And I think there are so many professors or teachers who impact a student's career like that. I mean, I have some people who look at me when I mention aerospace medicine, like, oh, you're crazy. And then there are others who understand and are like, oh, Chase, do it, like, pursue your wildest dreams in that area. And so finding those mentors who will really support your dreams, but then also, like you mentioned, like staying with it, staying consistent. And now like you're making your dreams a reality. I think it's just so inspiring and it's so amazing.
Yeah,
And as a student, I think it's always important to remember that right now, even though it might seem not realistic, you can make it realistic. And if you work towards that way, find the right communities and spaces, you never know which ideas will work out and which ones you can make a reality. It's just a matter of sticking through with it, which
yeah.
sounds, yeah.
And I love that you bring up the subject of space medicine because I've been getting a lot closer to that. Having a background in medical devices definitely helps with the language. But I've also been involved with a new nonprofit organization called OSMED. So OSMED is the Organization for Space Medicine, Engineering, and Design. So if you create a Venn diagram with space medicine, engineering, and design, you know, traditionally in the world of space, these three groups of people don't really talk to each other. I mean, barely, right? They're the ones who care about keeping people alive and thriving. They're the people who think very much about the function of human spaceflight, and the other people who think about the human side of things, emotional, physical, and things like that. So the point of the organization is to create a dialogue between these three groups of people in order to make the future of human spaceflight a lot safer. Because until we make it safer, we will not be able to exponentially increase the number of people who go up there, right? One, because it takes so long to pre-select the right people or to create environments that are suitable for them. It's just like not economically possible. And so there's this like kind of like carriage and horse type of conundrum that's happening. So if we make it safer, then we can send more people. Then we can learn how to make it safer, et cetera, right? So it's going to escalate from there. And I think we're at a inflection point in history right now where we are able to do that. Now is the time to truly care about how, you know, the negative impacts of being in space, mainly due to gravity at this point, and eventually due to radiation if we go farther in the solar system, is going to impact us. And there's a lot of philosophical questions we have to ask ourselves as well, right? Like, what are we going to do about reproduction? What are we going to do about, sending kids in space? Like, what are the moral uh, implications of all that, right? Um, so the way we're doing it is to by opening the doors to people like you, to people who are very interested in having a career in space and want to do a non-traditional career, right? And so we do that by producing a very large amount of products. So from white papers all the way to explanatory videos to kids content, really pushing the boundaries of communication, sometimes entertainment, and also making sure that we make space a lot less intimidating. Because, for example, space medicine, you have space and you have medicine, which are two of like the most difficult careers you can think of, and you merge them together and you put them in an environment that's designed to kill you, right? Like it doesn't get more extreme than that. So how do you start creating that path that makes people believe that they can be part of it, Being part of space medicine doesn't mean that you have to know everything about everywhere all the time. It means that you need to have an understanding of the high level um, view of like what this career is about. And then eventually you find, a portion of it that you're particularly passionate about, and you know a lot of people who you can learn a lot from, and you can continue pushing that career forward with invention and with discovery and with collaboration.
Yeah, I actually recently joined OzMed. It's amazing that you bring it up. I think we
Oh,
should definitely get more students and individuals involved. The moment I heard of it, I was very excited because
yeah.
I'm studying biomedical engineering, and usually, engineering, especially specifically biomedical engineering and space and medicine, it's a very few people who are down that track. And so finding a community of diverse thinkers who have all these really cool backgrounds that they're merging together it's just amazing. And I've been going to some of the journal clubs and listening to the talk.
Yes.
It's just an incredible community. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Um,
Yeah.
and so in your journey, I mean, kind of coming down to the last two questions I have for you, did you have any, I mean, looking at your journey, it's just remarkable what you've been able to accomplish. And I think many students, wish to be in a similar position as you one day in the future, but it can definitely be intimidating trying to pursue such a big individual entrepreneurial like pathway. So did you have obstacles in your journey? And if so, how did you overcome them? Because I think many times when, especially as a younger professional, when you face a failure or you face a challenge, you're like, oh, maybe this is not for me. Let me change directions. And sometimes redirection is not bad, but you tend to forget your original purpose. And so
Mm.
I'm curious if you have had any obstacles and how you overcame them.
Absolutely. I mean, life is about obstacles, and how you see it is about perspective, right? So I think the biggest obstacle that I'm still living through right now, because of the nature of my career, is being misunderstood, right? Like for example, I introduce myself a lot as a designer. I'm a designer, right? Sometimes I introduce myself as a space architect if I'm in a space conference, for example, but like most people don't understand what that means or don't even believe me when I tell them. So, so when I use the word designer, I think the first thing that comes to mind to people is like, oh, fashion, color, things like that, which are totally legitimate and beautiful careers, but that's absolutely not what I do, right? And so like it's got to begin with like the right definition of the word. And surprisingly, same thing with the word architect. When I introduce myself as a space architect, a lot of people use the word architecture as, all the different elements that you need to put in place in order to put together a space mission, which is very different from creating the habitat, the materials, the construction, the human flow, the integration of technology, all that stuff, which is what space architecture is. And so it's really stepping back, understanding who you're talking to, and then like putting them on the same level as you. Okay, you may think that I do those things, but I actually do these other things, right? And then, and throughout my career, I've always been extremely flexible as well. Like I've learned a lot of skills that are around what I'm supposed to do. Like I've learned graphic design and branding and, like material science and all those things, just enough to be dangerous, but I'm not like a professional in them. And so that also muddies a lot of how people perceive me, right? When I tell people that I've designed more than 100 physical products that have launched, that's a pretty exceptional number in a career so far. It's like they don't know what to do with that information, right? And then on top of that, the vast majority of the work I do right now is first to market technology. So I go specifically after new technology that's never been developed before, and I also go after exclusively after projects that make the world a better place, whether it's makes the human condition better, or the way we treat our planet, or is a stepping stone for innovation, right? And so all of these words become like very nerdy and very niche, and then it kind of confuses people a lot of the times. And I've been in many situations where people just straight up didn't believe what I said. Right? They're like, there's no way you could have done all this. I'm like, well, yes, it's possible. And not because I'm a genius or I'm like particularly like I don't sleep or whatever. No, I'm actually a completely normal person. I just have I guess four tools that I use, not tools, but like four ways of beings that I use, that actually teach to other people as well. So, the four ingredients for the kind of career that is necessary to have the same as mine is basically you have to be extremely curious, you have to be extremely creative and know how to express your creativity. You know how to be very proactive. Don't wait for other people to tell you what to do because you're not going to do that much. And then you have to be hyper productive, right? I never realized I was like that productive until I started working with other people and and I realized, wow, it's always been very important for me to like reach the goals and reach them on time and do a lot of them. And and yeah, it's worked to my advantage. Now, at the age of my in the place in my career, I can say that I've actually done a lot, but I'm also not slowing down, right? I'm really enjoying and feel the privilege of doing the work that I do every day, and that's very important for everybody who wants this kind of career to have. Now, one thing you're going to observe when you enter the space industry is honestly, I've never met one person in the space industry who's not passionate about what they do, right? Who's not jaded or, who's just there for the 9 to 5. There's a deep inherent passion and self-motivation that comes with wanting to go beyond um, wherever humanity has gone so far.
I absolutely love your four rules. I think they just encapsulate what we should have when we look for something we want to do every single day. Like, staying curious, loving what you're doing, being proactive. Like that shows you li really love what you're doing, and that's the career you should be following. But then also the idea of staying on top of things, being hyper productive. I love that. Like I'm also a very type A person. I love doing what I'm doing. But also I think you'll be hyper productive if you love what you're doing because you'll just
Mhm.
constantly want to keep working, keep doing. I can see it in like what you're doing, your work. It's just so evident, so clear how passionate you are. And I hope every student can really discover that niche interest that they have because it doesn't have to be in boxes. Like you said, you've dabbled all across many industries, and I think you find what you love. And I think that's what's special about space too, is you can find anything, any two things you love and put them together, and you can make yourself your own career, even if it doesn't exist already, which is just magical. And so now that we were able to learn a little bit about your journey and your incredible work, I mean, I just had no idea that there was this much thought process, this much insight and, background work that goes into every single design you make. It's just remarkable. Kind of knowing all that now, my last and final question for you is if you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, something you wish you knew when you were, maybe in high school, college, as a young adult, what piece of advice would you give yourself? And it could be anything. It could be career related, life related, just any piece of advice.
Um, so I'm a very anxious person. I've suffered from anxiety my entire life, and I've worried about things that are imaginary. Let's be real, right? They're just not there. And I'm sure that a lot of people who are so passionate about things that are so big may suffer from the same thing. So, if I were, talking to my younger self, I would say, worry about a lot less and really do a lot of that internal exercise that reduces your anxiety so you can go farther.
Love that. Yeah, no, I definitely will take that advice to heart. And I'm sure everyone who's listening who kind of has a similar situation or, has that similar feeling right now can probably recognize it, but don't know what to do about it. And so I
Hmm.
think someone telling them this is something you should definitely worry less about is something important to hear sometimes from someone who's been through it. And so thank you so much, Phnam, for taking your time to talk about your career and your journey with all that you're doing right now. I'm wishing you great luck on your analog mission. I can't wait to keep following your journey on LinkedIn, and hopefully we'll be able to meet each other in person soon. But your work is just, I can't even describe. Like I haven't had such a fun, interesting conversation about space architecture. So it's just so amazing to have you on this series. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Gitika, for having me, and thank you for doing the work that you do. You're inspiring so many people. You're going to hear from them in the next decades. I can't wait.
Thank you so much.